The Sydney Opera House was supposed to cost $7 million and open in 1963. It opened in 1973 at a cost of $102 million. The project ran 1,400% over budget and 10 years over schedule. The Denver International Airport, which opened in 1995, was supposed to cost $1.7 billion and open in 1993. It cost $4.8 billion and opened 2 years late. The automated baggage handling system alone, a system that airport designers were confident would work before it was built, cost $193 million more than originally planned and still didn't function reliably at opening. The Big Dig in Boston, the highway rerouting project, was estimated at $2.8 billion in 1985. Final cost, approximately $14.6 billion. It ran more than 16 years over its original schedule. These are not isolated failures of project management in specific industries. They are data points in one of the most consistent findings in infrastructure economics. Large construction and infrastructure projects, analyzed across decades and multiple countries, systematically cost more and take longer than planned, by a lot. The typical cost overrun for large projects is between 20% and 45%. For projects with novel or complex technical elements, overruns of 100% or more are common. This finding is not new. Bent Flyvbjerg, a Danish economist who has spent his career studying infrastructure projects, documented it across hundreds of projects in multiple countries over multiple decades. The research was available. Project planners knew about it. And the planning fallacy, the systematic tendency to underestimate costs and timelines, persisted across projects whose planners had access to Flyvbjerg's own research. This is the planning fallacy as it actually operates in the real world. Not a bias that disappears when people learn about it, but a structural feature of how project planning works that persists even among people who have read the research that documents it. The business school version of the planning fallacy is almost always presented as a cognitive bias, an individual-level error in reasoning that can be corrected through better thinking. This framing misses the structural causes, which are more important and more actionable than the cognitive ones. The first structural cause is the reference class problem, documented by Flyvbjerg and earlier by Kahneman and Persky. Project planners focus on the specific details of their project, their team, their resources, their specific technical challenges, rather than on the reference class of similar projects and what those projects actually cost and took. The inside view of a specific project is almost always more optimistic than the outside view of the reference class, for the structural reason that the inside view includes the planning team's genuine intention to execute well, and the outside view includes all the projects where genuine intentions also existed and still ran over. The second structural cause is what Flyvbjerg calls strategic misrepresentation, the deliberate underestimation of cost and timeline by project promoters to make a project appear feasible enough to receive funding approval. This is not ignorance. It is a rational response to an incentive structure. Projects that produce optimistic estimates get funded. Projects that produce accurate estimates get defunded in favor of more optimistic competitors. The planner who submits an honest estimate loses the funding to the planner who submits an optimistic one. And then the winning project runs over, and nobody is specifically accountable for the gap between the estimate and the actual cost. This incentive structure operates in corporate settings as identically as in infrastructure. The product team that estimates 12 months gets the green light. The product team that estimates 24 months loses the budget to the first team. When the 12-month estimate becomes a 24-month actuality, the team that made the original estimate is rarely evaluated on the accuracy of the estimate. They are evaluated on whether the product shipped. Have you ever submitted a project estimate that you knew was optimistic because a realistic estimate would have killed the project's approval? Leave a comment. The third structural cause is the most uncomfortable one. The people responsible for catching optimistic estimates are, In most organizational settings, the same people who approved the project in the first place. And they have a specific motivation not to find that the estimate was wrong, because finding that would imply that their initial approval was also wrong. This is not a minor organizational dysfunction. It is the mechanism by which the planning fallacy persists through the entire life cycle of a project, rather than being corrected early. The project begins with an optimistic estimate. The early stages confirm the optimism. Early stages of projects almost always go well, because early stages don't yet involve the integration challenges, the late discovered technical problems, and the scope changes that are the primary sources of cost and schedule overrun. The confirmation of early optimism reinforces the original estimate. By the time the problems arrive, the project has so much sunk cost, so much organizational commitment, and so much political investment that the rational response, reassessing the estimate honestly against the emerging evidence, is prevented by exactly those sunk costs, commitments, and investments. Fleifberg's prescription is specific. Before approving any large project, require an outside view assessment, a reference class analysis, that estimates cost and timeline based on the performance of comparable projects, rather than on the promoter's specific plan. This assessment should be conducted by an independent party with no stake in the project's approval. It should be presented to the decision makers alongside the promoter's internal estimate, with an explicit explanation of the gap between the two. The UK Treasury has required something close to this for major government projects since 2004. The process is called optimism bias adjustment, a systematic upward revision of cost estimates based on empirical reference class data. It doesn't eliminate cost overruns. It reduces the gap between estimates and outcomes because it forces the inside view to be confronted with the outside view before the approval is made. If the specific mechanics of why the planning fallacy persists through awareness of itself, the strategic misrepresentation incentive, the approval protection dynamic, the sunk cost escalation, is what makes this channel worth your time. The like is the direct signal. The employees and contractors who work on projects that run over budget and behind schedule experience the planning fallacy from the inside in a specific and underrepresented way. The optimistic estimate is not their estimate. The engineers who are building the Sydney Opera House do not set the budget for the Sydney Opera House. The project managers who are running the automated baggage system at Denver International Airport do not submit the estimate that says the system will cost X dollars and be ready by date Y. The people who are accountable for the estimate are usually not the people who are accountable for the execution. And the people who are accountable for the execution are usually not the people who had input into the estimate. This creates a specific professional experience. Being responsible for delivering a plan that was set by a different set of people under different incentives in a timeline that the people with the most detailed knowledge of the execution challenges did not set, at a cost that the people most familiar with the technical risks did not establish. The gap between the plan and the reality is not their gap, but they are the ones in whom it is experienced. The workforce on the Big Dig was, by multiple accounts, composed of skilled and committed people. The project was technically ambitious. The cost and schedule overruns were not primarily the result of execution failures. They were primarily the result of scope changes, late discovered underground infrastructure, and cost estimates that had systematically underestimated the complexity of urban tunnel construction under an active highway in a city with unknown underground utilities. The people who did the actual work did not make the estimate. The people who made the estimate had a specific incentive to produce an estimate that would get the project approved. The planning fallacy has a practical solution that is well documented, widely understood, and consistently underused. Reference class forecasting. Before any plan is submitted for approval, require an analysis of the actual outcomes of the most comparable plans that have been executed before. Not the plans, the outcomes. not what the comparable projects were estimated to cost and take, but what they actually cost and took. The reference class estimate provides the outside view that the promoter's inside view systematically excludes. The reference class estimate is not the final number. It is the starting number. The promoter then has the burden of explaining specifically why their project will deviate from the reference class, why their team, their technology, their organizational conditions, and their specific situation are different in ways that will produce a better outcome than the reference class suggests. In many cases, there will be genuine reasons. In many cases, there will not be, and the reference class estimate will simply be more accurate than the promoter's estimate. The key is that the outside view confronts the inside view before approval, rather than after the project has already accumulated the sunk costs, commitments, and political investments that make honest reassessment structurally impossible. The practical thing: for any project estimate you are currently evaluating, whether you are the promoter, the approver, or the recipient, find the reference class. Find 5 to 10 comparable projects that have been completed and look at their actual cost and timeline relative to their original estimates. The average gap between those estimates and those actuals is your starting point for evaluating the current estimate. The inside view gives you the plan. The reference class gives you the plan's track record. Most plans have a track record. Almost nobody looks at it before approving the plan. This content was developed with the support of artificial intelligence tools and underwent human review, editorial curation, and approval before publication. The analysis presented here is strictly educational and philosophical in nature, grounded in behavioral psychology and classical stoicism.